What is going on, my passionate Pokemon people? Today we are going to be going over the all Charizard deck, the best version of it. In fact, sometimes I like to call it Oops All Charizard because it does have every single legal version of Charizard, along with, of course, some Charmanders and Charmeleons in here to help us through. So what we're going to do is go into the detail on the cards and the reasoning why I have each of them in. The Charmanders and Charmeleons and Charizards are obvious, but the trainers a little bit more so. I'll explain why they're there. Then we're going to talk about some of the strengths and weaknesses of the deck. It does have some good strengths, but it is not a meta deck. We'll go, just get that out of the way right now. Then we can talk about some potential swaps to some of the cards to potentially make it better, let you all think about what types of swaps you may make. And then, of course, I'm going to talk about some swaps or some changes I've had suggested to me, but don't really like. So we'll go through that as well. And then in another video, we're going to actually test this out. In our next video, we'll go on to TCG Live and we'll show this deck in action. I may even do a couple of these changes that I go through, one or two cards through there, right? So just in general, this has legal cards from F and on, and then it's nowhere near meta, like I said, but it's fun. It's competitive enough. When the Charizard EX first dropped with the Dark Zard, I was able to get third in my locals, but it's gotten a little bit worse since, but almost feel like it's getting a little bit better from there. So, without further ado, let's get into the Pokemon that are in the deck. So first off, of course, we've got Charmanders. We've got 4 of them. We're going with 3 from the 151 set because they are the 70 HP Manders. So that's really important so that we can keep ourselves from getting one-shot by like the Dragapult EXs. And one thing I saw early on was the Iron Valiants where they could shift over. If you get 3 of them for 60, 3 shifts from bench, then that's 60 HP. You could still potentially have 4 for 80, but a lot tougher to do for your opponents. So 70 seems to be a nice little sweet spot, much better than 60 in there too. Of course, we do have the 1. Now, to be honest, I initially just put this bad boy in my deck because I just love the art. I wanted to have one of them in. But he can come in handy because of the Heat Tackle, which does 30 damage, does 10 to itself. I have occasionally had him trapped in my active, and less so trapped, but against the control decks. I'm able to kind of keep him in and slowly KO himself while I get my bench ready to really just start knocking things out. So that kind of works against those control stall decks. So the Charmander works decently well there, right? Now let's move over here before we get into the evolutions. We've got our Charizard V and V-Star, right? The Charizard V, we're really just going to try to evolve him as quickly as possible. You don't want to have to get him into the active because his energy, his attacks do way too much for the energy. One time ever, I've kind of used his Incinerate for 90 to destroy a tool, but really we don't want to be attacking with this. However, Charizard V-Star can come in handy. We can see that if we could get him on the bench, we get a damage counter on him. He can deal 230 for 3 energies, which can potentially go into 2. As you'll see from our list, we've got the Charizard Pogo in there, right? Now, is V-Star power also really good? It's going to deal 320 damage out there. We could potentially get that up to 370 if we can get a max belt on him. So that's key. The 320 not going to one-shot a lot of these big stage 2 Pokemon. They're going to be a little bit short, but if you throw a max belt on there, then we can get that. So nice easy stuff on there to get some damage, and also have a fire type in there, fire attacker. Right, all right, so let's move on here. We've got Charmeleon, the 100 HP one. Again, we want to get the higher HP, the better. So the 100 HP Charmeleon is going to help us not get one shot by really the Radiant Greninjas. That's really my biggest worry in trying to avoid those. Is it going to attack on demand? Not really. I mean, you can get through in 3 energy Fire Blast, which can turn into 2 with the Pogo Charizard, but not really going to be attacking, really just kind of sticking on your bench so that you don't get knocked out. right? And I'm playing 3 of these. I really want to have 3 just to not rely too much on rare candies. We do have some TM evolutions in there, and really just making sure that we can evolve and have some different ways of evolving all of these Charmanders as quickly as we can, right? Alright, and then we've got our Pokemon Go Charizard. Now, this card has a sentimental value to me. You know, when I rejoined and really started playing competitively again a few years ago, the first pack I bought was the Pokemon Go Elite Trainer box. I got these Charizards, and I came into my first ever locals with the Charizard deck. And I thought this bad boy was my attacker. I'm like, Flare Blitz 170, but no, his thing is the Burn Brightly. You want to keep him on your bench as much as possible because he can get you to double your fire energy, which is going to come in clutch for some of these higher energy attackers like the Charizard V and the 151 Charizard EX, which we're going to talk about in a minute. Now, the other good part about him is in a pinch, he can attack, right? You do want to load him up on your bench. You want to at least either Magma Basin or try to get him with 2 energies for a couple reasons. Number 1, retreat him. You want to be able to retreat him. It's going to cost you 2 energies with his ability to retreat. Or if he does get into the active spot, let's say somebody's got a Mimikyu or somebody has something like that that's not letting your EXs or Vs attack, then you're going to be able to do that Flare Blitz in a pinch, and you're going to be able to knock out pretty much any Pokemon with those types of abilities on it. Just know from there he's a sitting duck because you discard all the energy, and now you've got to get 2 more on him to retreat. So it could be a kind of knockout for knockout, kind of see what happens, but it's versatile. And a cool card, right? Alright, so then this is our bread and butter right here, right? Charizard EX, Dark Charizard really is what takes, makes this deck even competitive at all. I've been trying to run this Charizard with the Charizard V and really wasn't having much luck, if any, at all until we really got to this bad boy here, right? I mean, we don't need much explanation. The Infernal Rain is going to let us grab 3 energies and disperse them. Burning Darkness just gets stronger as the game goes along. But this is really our main attacker still, and we're going to have 3 of them in here. Now, Charizard EX. This is, in many ways, I would like to call it an underrated card, but in many ways, the Charizard EX Dark is a lot better, right? But I think it's good to have one. He's a fun one to have, especially because a lot of people started countering the Charizard EXs by playing a lot more grass types, and we're seeing more grasses these days, right? So we can get him in here for a few things. His Brave Wing, 1 energy, and if it has damage counters, is going to deal 100 more. So for 1 energy, you're going to deal 160. You could Magma Basin that onto him pretty easily. And then here's this attack here, discarding 3 energies, so a huge cost there, but it is going to deal 330. So if you're in what a lot of Zard players are going to think is a mirror match, try to get this bad boy loaded up, and you're going to be able to one-shot those Charizards. Just ideally, you're going to pair that up with your Pogo Charizard, right? So that you're going to only use 2. But even still, because of the 3 energies, the odd number, you still, unfortunately, are going to need to discard 2, which are going to usually put them down to none, and then you might be stuck with Brave Wing from there. So keep that in mind. But still a fun card to use, and I mean, this art's super cool. If you want to play your deck with the other alt art in real life, be my guest, but I wouldn't do it. I actually do have copies of them though. I was able to pull it. So let's move on. Last one on here is the Radiant Charizard. Now this one I'm on the fence about, and I'll talk about later on kind of why more in depth in terms of what I would replace with it. But the problem with this one, in my opinion, is that considering we only have 4 Charmanders and our 2 Charizard V, this one puts us as our 7th basic. So a lot of times you're going to get stuck with him to start the game. He's going to be in your active spot, and you're not going to want to spend 3 energy, waste 3 energy to retreat him. You're obviously not going to be able to attack. So what's going to happen a lot of times if you're stuck with him from the beginning is that he's going to get knocked out. And as we'll see later, but I'll spoil that now, we're not playing switch cards in this deck. So that's a big issue of we might just lose a prize card and have him stuck in the active spot. To me, I started doing a lot better when I removed him, but You know what? This is all Charizards. I promised y'all that we're going to play every single legal one, and maybe some of you would be able to do this better than me, or at least take that prizer because he can come in clutch, right? Alright, so let's talk about our supporters and item cards. So first off, we have Buddy Buddy Poffin, which is just a really huge boost to this deck because you don't have to waste spots with the Battle VIP pass, but we really needed either that Battle VIP or the Poffin because a lot of times we're getting stuck, like I said, with one basic Pokemon, and then we can lose that match real quick if we don't get it. So the Poffin's great because you can pull it with an Arven, and you can stack your benches with your Manders early. You can grab 2 of them, 70 or less, so those 70 HP ones are fine, right? Nest Ball. Now, the reason why I don't go 4 Poffins is because we need some Nest Balls. We do need them for the Charizard Vs, and of course, if you're going to play the Radiant Charizard, may as well have the Nest Ball in for him too, to throw him in towards the end of the game. So I'm only going to play 2 of them though, only 2 Nest Balls, but which usually is enough. If you really need that V out, you can Arven into it. Worst case scenario, you don't need your Charizard Vs, and you can just straight up use them for a Charmander. But what happens here a lot of times is you're able to turn these either Nest Balls or the Poffins into Ultra Ball fodder, which I always love to do. You're going to need some extra cards for that, right? Alright, moving on, we've got rare candies. So I went down to 3 rare candies in order to include the Radiant Charizard. I was running 4. Now, it's probably enough considering we're going with our 3 Charmeleons in there too. I mean, maybe you remove a Charmeleon and you're going to go with 4, right? That's something to consider. But considering you can use Arven to grab it, it may be okay with just 3, but it makes me a little bit nervous, not going to lie. I like my 4. Ultra Ball, let's use that Ultra Ball. We've got 4 of them because there's so many different Mons we can get. I mean, worst case scenario, we even freaking Ultra Ball into a Charmander, but we want 4 of them because we want to be able to pull the Pokemon we want, right? I mean, nothing crazy about this. Magma Basin, let's get our Magma Basins in. I'm going with 3 of them. You really want to have that as an option. If you do encounter a match where you don't need to use any of your fire Pokemon, either the Vs, the Pogo Charizards, or your Charizard EX from 151, you can probably do without playing them. But it's good to have and to be able to pull. You want those 3. It's also really good too to just get rid of your opponent's stadiums. That's what I find sometimes. I don't even necessarily need Magma Basin, but I want to get rid of my opponent's stadium, so you're going to be able to play that, right? Underrated. Arven. Now this is the bread and butter of the deck. You want your Arvens. You want to be able to pull them quick. You want to cross your fingers that you pull them quick because you're going to be able to pull what you need from there. Your Ultra Balls, your Poffins, your rare candies, all of that good stuff. And then on the other end, of course, you can pull your TM Evolutions, which we'll talk about in a second, or your maximum builds. So you can pull that bad boy out of there, right? Arvens, 4 of those. No negotiations on this. You're not going to play less than 4. Right. Boss's orders, we're going to go with 3. 3 boss's orders. It's always nice to have 4. 3 gets you at least enough consistency to where you're hopefully going to be able to pull it when you need it. But there you go, bosses. Cynthia's Ambition. Now here's where we get to some of the super rogue cards. I've always been a fan of this card, Cynthia's Ambition, because of the way it works, right? Draw until you have 5 in your hand, and then if you have a Pokemon knocked out, draw until you have 8. Now, what you're going to notice about this deck if you play it is your hands are small, like at all times, because you're going to be Ultra Balling things away. You're going to really be benching all of your Pokemon that you have and using all of those items. It's going to be pretty rare where you go over 5 cards. So usually I find myself pulling between 2 to 3 on average with Cynthia's Ambition. And if you're able to save that until you have a knockout, just give yourself a turn like that your Zard EX is getting knocked out. Try to save that Ambition towards next turn, and then now you draw till you have 8. I'm going with 2 in this deck. 3 would be nice, but spacing is always an issue. I find that 2 usually does okay for me, right? Now, Iono. Now, this one is one that I've recently kind of pivoted to. I've actually played most of the time with Professor's Research in this deck instead, just because I like the consistency of always getting me up to 7. And it kind of paired well with the Cynthia's Ambition, to where if I didn't want to discard, I'm going to hope that I get an Ambition. But really now, as I'm kind of thought more about it and done a little bit more testing, I think the Iono works better because you're sure to not discard, right? I mean, sometimes if you really, you have no choice but to play it because maybe you only have that 1/5/1 Zard EX in there and you have to play a research to discard. Now that's not an option anymore for the whole game unless you can get yourself, a lot of good stuff to happen with your Roseanne's backup. So Iono is good because it's going to shuffle, so it's going to let you be able to, not lose any cards. And like I mentioned too, you're often going to be at a low card count anyway, so it's not going to hurt you too much. Better to shuffle and draw than to discard completely. And then of course it can hamstring your opponent when you're behind, but the downside is it can also hamstring you as well. If you're later in the game, you're not going to be wanting to use these, but a lot of times by late in the game, you're already thinned out your deck enough to where you're not in too bad of a position, right? With all of our Ultra Balls, with our Zard's ability of pulling those energies, we're usually in an okay spot. So I think Iono works. All right, then Roseanne's backup, in my opinion, one of the most underrated cards out there right now. I used to be a huge Clara fan. Now, when Clara rotated out, I was like, oh, what am I going to do now? Kind of really deep dove back into like my bulk and looked at like all of my trainers. Like, now here's a card I've considered for a while. Not quite as good as Clara because you can't get them direct to your hand. You could do 2 and 2, but it does have some benefits, right? You can choose one or more. And the cool thing is you can get the tool in the stadium recycled, right? You can shuffle a Pokemon, you can shuffle an energy into your deck, which are common things, not too common, but you've got your Super Rods and things of that nature. But I'm going to go with Roseanne's backup over the Super Rod, over the Night Stretcher because of this tool in the stadium, right? We want to have the versatility to get those back in. We can get our maximum belts back, or we can even get a freaking TM evolution again, which is rare, but you can also do, right? I play 2 of these. Maximum belt is the ace spec that we're going with. We love the maximum belt because it gives us the versatility to use on a couple different Pokemon, right? You could throw it on your Charizard V-Star and use his V-Star abilities. Now going to deal 370. That's going to kill pretty much anything that doesn't have a Hero's Cape on it, right? Or another thing I really love is when I'm able to Arven into that, you get yourself a Zard in hand, Arven into Rare Candy, and the max belt, and someone's got a Chien Pao out there. Boom. Chien Pao's dead with your Dark Zard. So I really love this one. You could probably throw it on other things too. I mean, shoot, get it on that Zard EX from 1/5/1, and now you're able to hit 1 energy 160. That turns into 210. Still not crazy, but can help you out. All right, if it's an EX. Alright, then we have our TM evolution. So I'm going to go in here with just 2. I'm not sure when I went down to 2. I think I sacrificed things in here. But I've got 2 in there, which would be nice for 3. I think I actually, when the A-Specs came out, that's when I switched it. I switched one out. Ideally 3 for consistency is nice, but usually you're pulling those out with your Arvens, and you're really only using them early in the game to get yourself a couple Charmanders into Charmeleons. And that's also why I play 3 Charmeleons. I found that 2 doesn't give you the consistency to get 2 evolved. A lot of times you're going to have one of them prized, and now you've got 1 TM evolution used to evolve 1, whereas if you've got 3 of them, then it gives you a little bit more versatility to use this TM evolution. If you want to kind of just eliminate this completely, well, you may only play 2 Charmeleons as well, right? All right, and then with energy is our last one, 10. I'm going to go 10. It seems to be the sweet spot. A lot of people with these Zard EX decks are playing, between 6 and 8. I've been kind of told that. Considering this deck and the inclusion of our Charizard V-Stars and our 151 Charizard, we need a few more energies here. We need a few more, I'm going with 10, 8 is too few, 12 is too many. I don't know who plays odd numbers of energies, maybe you do, but I'm not going to do that. So let me know what you think. Where are we at here? Do you like my trainer and item selection? Does it fit well with the Mons in there too? What would you do differently? I will go through some suggestions later on, but let me know. Always interested in that as we're moving forward. Alright, let's go through the strengths and weaknesses of this deck. Now, the biggest thing that I really love about this deck, I love versatile decks. I don't like one-trick pony decks, whether or not they're meta or not, right? As you're going to see as you continue to get into my channel, is meta is not my thing. I like just weird, odd decks with Pokemon I really like to play with, and fun mechanics, and versatile decks. Alright, so this one is versatile. It doesn't mean it's the best, but it's versatile. We've got both fire and dark attackers, right? And what's good about that is, our this particular dark Pokemon, Charizard, is weak to grass. So if you do get someone who you're weak against, you can pivot over and you can use your fires, right? And then just different attackers. Charizard EX isn't our only attacker. We could attack with this bad boy. We can go ahead and come over here and we can attack with our V-Star. If you want to be crazy and attack with your Charizard from Pogo, you could do that too, right? In a pinch, cards like Mimikyu EX, you're going to want to use him for. If you've hitting a stall deck with Snorlax, you can also kind of have the versatility with Magma Basin to load up your bench with energy so that you don't get caught red-handed, as long as you don't have all your energies discarded and things like that. So that's always good. Right now, a strength and weakness is that there's only 7 total basics. Right, you've got your 4 Manders, you've got your 2 Charizard V's, and you've got your Radiant Charizard, which is why Radiant Charizard is on the fence for me. Right, you actually can have a tendency to get multiple mulligans here too, right, because of that. So your opponent might start with 3 extra cards potentially in hand compared to you, which can be an issue sometimes. But a lot of times it does mean too that you're starting out in a pretty good position. Compared to other decks, you're not going to have to put a Lumineon V in your active. So this is why I'm on the fence about Radiant Zard. He's the only one who you would really be mad that you had to start with. Even the Charizard V, he's at least got some bulk to him. You can usually pretty quickly evolve him and go from there. So you're not in a terrible place no matter who you start, unless you get your Radiant Zard. Right, so that's always fun. Other strengths, there's just so many options there. Like I mentioned with your max belt, with your different attackers, and depending on the situation, who you want to get out there. And explosive vortex is crazy. V-Star moves, all that good stuff. So that's always good. Now our weaknesses, we've got a lack of draw engine. I mean, that's the most obvious one right there, right? So you really need to work on that and kind of really think about your hand early on, and not rely on RNG as much as possible. So kind of thinking about that as like your biggest focus: evolve your Charmanders, get them benched, get them evolved, no matter the cost. And worst case scenario, kind of working towards getting that Dark Zard out there, right? If you need to pivot and get yourself your 151, get your Pogo Zard out there, you could do it, but really work on getting that, and then also being able to adapt if you have to play that V-Star, right? So that's really huge in there. The other strategies in general are work on deck thinning. You really want to thin out your deck, use your Ultra Balls, even if sometimes you don't need them in that moment, like kind of get them into your hand. Waste your Ultra Balls, waste the cards that you don't need, utilize your Magma Basins even to discard your fire energies, get rid of those TMs if you're not going to need them, because you don't want to get Iono'd and then you've got a couple TM evolutions in hand, or your Pokemon Go Charizard when you don't need him. So thin out that deck as much as possible, which was nice about when you had Professor's Research, which would help you thin, you could get rid of hand that you do not need. Arvin, of course, as I mentioned, he's your best friend. He's your best friend in that regards. Get what you need with him, whether it's bench support, whether it's rare candies, whether it's your tools. Now, also kind of utilize some mental skills. As you get into my channel and watch more of my content, you will see that the Hawk's Nest is really big on mental skills and mental toughness. So what I want to do is also give you some tips in terms of gamesmanship if you're playing live, right? So really try to control your facial expressions and use a little bit of trickery sometimes to see if your opponent, you can trick them into doing things, right? Like if you've got a small hand, but maybe you like that small hand. Maybe it's a good small hand that you've got a couple Manders on your bench and you've got a rare candy and a Charizard EX in hand. Kind of get it out there to where they might notice it too, and are thinking of using an Iono. Just kind of address that elephant in the room and see if you can goad them into the Iono using reverse psychology. Sometimes it's worked for me where they're like, oh no, I'm not going to do that, and you're like, sucker. Next turn you evolve into. If you get Iono'd, if you get your hands switched up, especially your starting hands, don't show your disappointment that you can't get out of that bad hand. Control those facial expressions in your body language so that you can kind of get them thinking one thing that's not true, right? Get them thinking that maybe you do have a good hand and that they need to play faster, whereas you want to slow things down, right? And another big thing about that is try to make them think that your Dark-Zard is your only option for attackers, right? Don't reveal until last minute your Charizard EX from 151. Try not to let them see that you have your Pogo Zard in there either, because that's going to change the way they play sometimes, right? They're gonna kind of be thinking about that and trying to avoid it, unless you think it's going to mess with them and really get them rattled. One thing I do like, and I've noticed, is that the Charizard V is one that you do want benched a lot of times. You do kind of want to get that out there as an option for you, because it takes some time to load up in terms of getting damage on it, and sometimes you want to make sure you can grab 3 energies on it. So you do get that, but a lot of people just really discount that, and like I've really seen that people think less of me as a player because I'm playing V. They're like, oh, what do you got that Charizard V in there for? Until I throw a max belt in V-Star and one-shot their Dragapult, So use that to your advantage too. Hey, they think you're a crappy player, and look, the reality of this deck, you're not going to win a championship with it. You're unlikely to win your locals, but at least show them that you're having fun, and take your wins when you can, right? So that's always good. Use your basins, another good strategy. Make sure that you're using your magma basins to really get your Charizards on the bench with energy so they don't get trapped. The ones that aren't your dark ones, of course, because Dark-Zard can't be magma basin too. But you don't want your Charizard to get stuck out there, the Pogo one, with those 2 retreat costs for multiple turns. So have it ready. Have it ready out there with 2 energies on it, even if that means it's down 40 HP. They're usually going to one-shot it anyway with 170. So just go ahead and load it up, and that way you can retreat it, or you can just say, you know what, let's just attack, and he's going to die next turn anyway. So kind of go that route, right? Thinking about the fact that you only have 4 Charmanders is big. So make sure you know where you're at in terms of strategy. Sometimes you may want to pivot in late game, and you're like, shoot, you know what, my Charizard EX 151, I want to use that explosive, whatever that attack is, explosive flames or whatever. But do you have enough energies for that? You need 4 energies. If you don't, and you want to get your Pogo out there to help, so you only need 2, do you have enough Charmanders left? How can you get there? That's something that's really key. Do remember your Roseanne's backup. Those are big. It can potentially help you recycle some of those ones you need if you had to discard one of those single or double versions of cards. But at the same time, it's not super reliable unless you have like Nest Balls or Ultra Balls in hand, because it does shuffle it back into your deck. Also, be careful with those shuffles. Just because you can shuffle a Magma Basin upon use doesn't mean you should. You want to keep that deck thin. If you're not going to need that Magma Basin, if you're not going to need that energy, don't shuffle it back into your deck. It's just going to clog you up, right? Now thinking about some other cards to consider that I've thought about is a couple of these Charmeleons, right? We've got this one. It's only 90 HP, but if you do want to kind of have your Charmeleon as an option, as an attacker, for example, against those Mimikyus, which have 70 HP, you could potentially go with this Obsidian Flames one with Heat Tackle. Does 20 damage to itself, only 2 energies, so solid addition, but the 90 HP leaves him open to our Radiant Greninjas getting a knockout on him. Oops. And over here we also have the Paldean Fates Charmeleon, which has Flare Veil. I've seen a lot of these go into use once they came out, because it does prevent the effects of attacks used by your opponent's Pokemon, but it doesn't affect them from taking damage. So you would still need to pair it with something to prevent damage to really make it useful. In my opinion, it's a lot better to just go with the 100 HP one, right? Let it take some damage from an effect or damage like a Radiant Greninja, and just go from there. You do have the Combustion, which deals 50 damage, but I really like the 100 HP Mander just much better, right? The other thing in general, it's not up here, but I'm going to talk about the Radiant Charizard again, removing it. Do we want to remove it for any of these cards here? Do we want to remove it to add more of what we were talking about, right? All right, enough about that. That's why he's here, Radiant Zard. All right, then we have Counter Catcher, right? Counter Catcher is one that a lot of people have talked to me about in terms of replacing bosses with. There's a good amount of Zard and really other players who are just using Counter Catcher in general over bosses. I'm just not the biggest fan. I mean, there's of course the benefit of it not being a trainer card and you can use it in combo with one, but the fact that you can only use it when your opponent has more prize cards than you just doesn't work for me. Bosses orders have gotten me wins a lot of times when we're down like 2-1 and things like that, or 1-2. So I just like bosses better. It's just more reliable. Lost Vacuum, you know what? It's a good card. I am just very anti-Lost Box and any of these Lost Zone cards. It's the reason I don't like it. It is good. You can get rid of a Hero's Cape. You can get rid of some of those tools that can be pesky. But number one, what are you going to remove from the deck to put it? And number two, is it really that useful? And at the same time, you're going to have to put a card from your hand in the Lost Zone. As we mentioned, hand size can be an issue, so to have to discard just to remove a tool or a stadium isn't really worth it for me. I'd rather Ultra Ball if I'm going to have to discard so that I can draw a Pokemon, right? Night Stretcher. Now this one is one that I did seriously consider when it came out rather than Rosan's backup. Because you do get that energy or Pokemon immediately. You can get your Obsidian Flames Charizard back, which can come in really clutch, or an energy, which you're really not needing those energies in hand too much. It would just be those Pokemon. But to me, just being able to get your Ace Spec back, being able to get your Stadiums back, and get both of them in there, just to me is much better. So I'm not going to use Night Stretcher, but let me know what you all think. Next up, we have Switch Cards. Switch Cards we are not putting in there. Really, right now, they're just clogging us up. There's no room for Switch Cards, so we're not going to use Switch Cards. It's definitely a bold strategy. We'll see if it works out. But I've rarely been caught... I've rarely been caught with this, in a bad position without having to switch, because like we've said, that Dark Zard is able to get those energies if you really need to retreat. But then the facts are you're not going to have many Pokemon you need to retreat. Sometimes those Charizard Vs can become an issue, but usually by the time we get into game, you're able to slowly load them up with energies so that we're not going to switch. Like for example, if you have a Charizard V on your bench, your attach per turn should always be to that Charizard V. Because you know that with the Charmanders, once you evolve it into the Darkzard, then you're going to be able to load up energy on it. So a lot of times for me, I'm going to attach per turn, and then let's say next turn I'm evolving into a Darkzard. I throw 2 onto the Dark and 1 onto the V. Now I'm already in a good position. Just don't need those switch cards, especially with Magma Basins. If they're going to trap you out there, you can usually just retreat, right? All right, not the Grand Tree. We'll talk about the ace specs in a minute. Let's think about Cassiopeia. Now, the Cassiopeia I was considering rather than Cynthia's Ambition, right? It is something to consider that you can search your deck for 2 cards, put them into your hand, really 2 any cards. I mean, you can get yourself an Iono for next turn, or you can get a rare candy and the Zard you need, anything you need. So that's pretty good. And the fact that you kind of can get to 1 card relatively easily, it makes me consider it. And I may try it out. I haven't tested it, but I'm just not sure how often we're going to get to 0 cards. So that's my biggest issue with the Cassiopeia in this case, right? Let's see what else instead of. We can get Silene as an option over maybe the Cynthia's Ambition. Flip 2 coins and any number of cards from the discard to the top of your deck. May even want to do that instead of the Roseanne's backup. I just don't like Silene because of the RNG. You get 2 tails and now you just wasted a supporter. Even 1, I mean, is 1 really worth it? I would much rather use either the Night Stretcher or we're going to go with Ambition, right? Now, Professor's Turo scenario, always an option as well. What I kind of like about this one, and I'll talk a little bit more about that with the ace specs too, is the ability to get that Charizard back into your hand, the EX Dark, and then you could potentially just throw him back down on another of what was your benched Charmanders or Charmeleons, load up on more energy, and not take a knockout, because usually your Charizard's going to take 2 turns to knock out. Something to consider. I just don't find it quite useful enough to remove for other cards. It doesn't have too much of a place in there, right? All right. Now, Professor's Research. Of course, I mentioned that one over Iono is an option if you want to have the consistency of drawing till you have 7. Can get you out of bad hands if you draw it. It's one I like. I'm a big fan of Research. I just think Iono is slightly better in this case, right? Now here's an interesting one, another kind of dumpster diver card that I also may try out recently that I haven't, is Zissou. Draw cards until you have 1 more in your hand than your opponent. Like I said, we're usually going to have small hands here. They're pretty much always going to be smaller than your opponents. And now there's all kinds of draw engine mechanics with the the grass ogre pawn mask and other stuff, where a lot of your opponents are going to kind of getting larger hands in this day and age. So it can kind of get you to flip the script in many ways without having Pheasantipede on your bench. And you can flip the script and kind of grab and get a pretty big hand. So it's something to consider too, rather than Cynthia's Ambition, which can kind of be hit and miss, and you can use it. Let's say maybe you do have 4 or 5 cards, but your opponent's up to freaking 10, 15, which, okay, a little exaggerated, but a lot of times they might. All right, so now let's talk about the ace specs, and I'm going to go in order of my preference here, so not in the order you're going to see on the screen, right? So we've got Hero's Cape. I mean, Hero's Cape was the first one that I went with in the deck just because of 430 HP Charizard just sounds super scary. But what I found was that he's still often dying in 2 hits. You know, a lot of Pokemon these days are dealing 200 plus damage. So is it really, getting you that much more bang for your buck to have that in there? I'm finding no. I find the Max Belt, despite it not working on everyone, just is a lot better situationally. And then it really, Max Belt is getting even more better as we go, because you're seeing more and more EXs go. Vs are being rotated out, and we're seeing a lot more of these EXs come in with these newer decks. So I think it's better. All right, now next one to think about. Now this one's kind of a gimmicky one. It's almost, as I mentioned, like the Professor Turo scenario, right? But it's a little bit better. Number one, it's an item card, so we're not going to have to waste a supporter on it. We can also pull it with Arven, and you get to put one of your Pokemon and all attached cards into your hand, right? So it's kind of same idea here, is you can pull out a Charizard who's about to die. You keep all of those cards, right? So you can bench that Charmander again. You keep the energies, you keep potentially the Charmeleon in there too, and then you can just evolve it again if you're ready, right? So it's one that can be gimmicky and can really kind of flip the script as well, because you're pulling that Zard and all the attached cards, and hopefully, boom, throwing it right back down onto one of your Manders or Melians and just getting right back to action without losing 2 prizes. I tested this one out in locals and online a bit. It really, like, it's so fun when it works, but I didn't find it consistent enough to really be worth it, because you're able to pull the tools a lot easier with Arven, whereas a lot of times I find myself not wanting to grab Scoop Up Cyclone over other cards I need, like Rare Candies, Ultra Balls, and Poffins with that Arven, so you have to rely on just kind of pulling it, which, as we know, not super reliable with our draw power, right? Alright, let's think about from here the Grand Tree. This is one that almost seems like it could really work with this deck as a stadium. It can be recycled with Roseanne's backup if they get it out of here, right? So you search for a stage 1 Pokemon that evolves from a basic, evolve it. If that Pokemon was evolved, then you go straight to the stage 2. So I mean, this is kind of crazy, especially considering we're really trying to load up on like Charizards as much as possible. So it may work, and also, except for the fact you can't do it your first turn, which is obvious, or the turn it was put into play. But this one almost seems like it's got some potential here to really do some crazy stuff. Like, for example, getting that Charizard EX and Pokemon Go Charizard out in the same turn. I mean, that can make some sparks fly. I mean, shoot, it's a little bit crazy. I mean, you can't do both in the same turn. Wait, I think it is both, right? That may search their deck for a stage. Their basic Pokemon. Can you do it on more than one? That's an interesting one. I gotta look into that, because if you can do it on more than one in the same turn, that's wild. Even if you can't, it's still pretty good to take a couple turns to load these up. So I'm gonna have to test this one out and see what we can do with it. I've got to look more into that card. Alright, what's next on the list is our secret box. Alright, this one's a good one to again just get us everything we need. We're seeing secret box get a little bit more play recently. I think some people are seeing it's a little bit underrated, but in this deck it's tough. You've got to discard 3 other cards from your hand, but then you can get an item, tool, supporter, and stadium. So I mean, one thing I would just love to do with this is grab an item, tool, and stadium, play all of those, and then your supporter is Iono, and then you're going to go from there. Or, the crazy part about that, you can grab an Arven, and then you can get 2 items and 2 tools, which, when the hell are you going to need 2 tools? I don't know, but you might. It's an interesting one to consider, but I just think that max belt's a lot better. And then, of course, the fact that you have to discard 3 other cards, unless you're going to be sure you pull that Iono, you want to do it. But to discard 3 in a potentially small hand could have you discarding cards you don't like. So think about that. All right, and our last one here, if we have a Prime Catcher, which is kind of a meta card in general. Of course, you could potentially do with this is replace one of those boss's orders with that, go down to 2, and then that would give you another spot of some of those cards where you only have 2 or 3 that you want to up the number to get some more consistency with. This could almost replace a boss's orders as a dual action, and then of course get you the switch. You can still use supporters, all that good stuff. We don't need to sell you Prime Catcher, right? It's been the most expensive ace spec for a reason. So I get a ton of suggestions. You know, like I said, this Charizard deck is my oldest deck. It's my first one I've went to locals with. It's gone through all kinds of changes, and a lot of the suggestions have really helped it get to where it is. But there are a lot of suggestions that I still have gotten, and just don't like. All right, so let's talk about those. First one, Forest Seal Stone. A lot of people tell me, oh, well, you've got Charizard V in there. Why would you not want the Forest Seal Stone? And it's because I have Charizard V. Really, I have Charizard V-Star. And the reason I have Charizard V-Star in there is to use this V-Star ability. So I'm not going to waste my one option at a V-Star on a Forest Seal Stone. So I'm not going to include that. I have tested it out just in case. Like, oh, maybe this is a match where, you know, I would rather get that card from my deck I need because I can get Arvin, and I'm not going to use that Charizard V-Stars, and I just find it not to work. It's taking up space in the deck, valuable space that I need. You know, we're seeing that because of the versatility here, there's a lot of cards that I would rather have another one of rather than a Forest Seal Stone in here, so that's why I'm not going to go with Forest Seal, right? All right, and then next up is Roxanne. And this one is one that a lot of people think about cards like Iono as ones that really more so hurt your opponent. And the reason I have Iono is not to get my opponent's hand down, it's really to get me out of a bad hand. And the times I need Iono or other hand shuffling cards would be in the beginning of the game. When I'm in a bad hand, I've got no options here except to draw, and Roxanne is just going to be useless for me. Because once my opponent has 3 cards, usually I'm in a pretty solid spot already to where even if my hand is small, I'm not going to need it as much. I'm set up, or really it's too little too late. So Roxanne, while a solid card for some decks, is not going to work for me in this Charizard one, right? And I got a little bit ahead of myself, right, with the switch cards. I already mentioned how I don't want switch cards despite them being suggested, switching or any other similar cards, right? I already mentioned that, got ahead of myself. And then I also mentioned the Lost Vacuum already. So those are some suggestions I get. You know, this deck has, like I said, gone through a lot of changes. It's gone through even more since this iteration of it, but I really just wanted to show you all. So I'm always down for suggestions, just don't be mad if I don't always implement them, right? So that is pretty much it in terms of the deck. We went over what the deck looks like, how to play it, what some of its strengths are, what some of its weaknesses are as well. If you like what you saw, make sure you go out and share this video wherever you talk Pokemon, right? Get your fellow trainers to come back. Leave a comment in terms of what types of variations they would do, what they like, what they don't like, and let's see what we got here to improve this Oops All Charizard deck. Now, one challenge I'll give all of you, if you're interested, is we can allow up to 4 non-Zard Pokemon in here, right? To make this deck a little bit more playable in meta and kind of eliminate our biggest problem of drawing, right? So challenge I'll give you is to think about 4 non-Charizard or Charmander family Pokemon to put in here to make this better. You know, what would they be? The most obvious ones, the Barrel, Pidgeot EX, we can do that, you know, kind of that's why the 4 will allow you to kind of have some evolutions in there. So think about that. I'll choose 2 or 3 of them and maybe build that deck and test them out. Maybe you can even go against me on TCG Live, right? So stay tuned for the next video. Well, the next video we're going to play a few games online on TCG Live, and we're going to put this deck in action so you can really see what it's about. So make sure you tune in. Even more so in the long term, we're going to be doing a few more of these rogue decks, and we're going to start with our basic starters, right? Next up is going to be a Blastoise EX deck. That one's going to be really fun, actually is decently competitive. And then the third one, once we finish that portion up, we're going to do a Venusaur EX deck, which has been able to come into its own a little bit with some of these newer sets, so I'm finally able to get something that's playable there. So make sure to stay tuned and hit that like button if you're ready to fly. Hit that subscribe button if you're ready to really dive into this content here with the Hawks Pokemon Nest, your go-to place for rogue decks and mental toughness insertations.